Let's jump into our episode discussion, episode number 70 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role. And if you haven't checked us out before, we'd like to do just a quick recap of what happened in the video or in the episode. Since the episodes can be 4 or 5 hours long, we just boil that down to a 15-20 minute video. And then we cut that out separately and host it on our channel. So if you're watching just the recap and you want to see our full thoughts and discussions, or more importantly, you want to give us your thoughts on the episode, you can check the description below. And then lastly, one last plug, we do have a Discord. We just kind of referenced it, but we want to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to jump into the Discord. Everybody's welcome, whether you're an expert or a brand new critter. Literally anyone's welcome, so make sure you check that out as well. Having said that, I think your first half.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
about to have a panic moment.
So let's do this. Episode 70 begins with the party arriving in Basaras. And as they immediately see lots of soldiers walking the streets from all over Exandria, but particularly Vasselheim. And there are also 3 skyships docked, not like exactly in the city, but in very close proximity. And suddenly one of these skyships explodes. Some of the guards I just mentioned start racing toward that way, but for the most part, the other denizens of Basaras are kind of unfazed, seemingly that this is kind of like a regular occurrence these days. Keyleth decides, okay, I'm going to split off on my own and kind of see what I can find out about like what's going on with that explosion and just like what's going on in general. They press her a little bit about like, should you go alone? But she insists to go alone. And so she does that, but they make plans to meet up a few hours later once they've both handled their errands. So the party then heads toward Imahar Joe's. So they arrive at his shop and it's closed up. And after knocking with no response, Chetney begins to pick the lock of the door, and Ladna kind of throws her voice inside, I believe with prestidigitation, to call for Joe. After this, they hear something kind of clatter on the ground and a voice that they don't recognize. So Imogen at this point casts Detect Thoughts and can feel 9 different minds inside when suddenly a small glass orb kind of rolls out in front of them like a grenade kind of. And we have dexterity saves. So Chetney, Ladna, and Imogen all take some lightning damage, and the door kind of like slams shut again. So it's at this point the party splits up. They kind of go look for different points of entry, potentially. Ladna and Imogen go to the roof where they find this like smoke grate. Fern, Ashton, and Orem go around back, and the rest of the party stays up front. Inside, through the smoke grate, Ladna can see that the furniture's been moved, and there's seemingly a lot of people kind of like standing guard around 2 individuals that are like kind of being imprisoned. One of these individuals is Joe, and the other is this bunny-like humanoid. Information is passed between the three groups of Bell's Hells via sendings and messages, and they're basically planning to like all kind of attack at once from their different positions. Before this can really get going, though, Ladna is actually attacked by a roguish figure who spots her, and we roll initiative. And as always, we're going to just try to hit the highlights of this combat. It was a very long one, which it actually bleeds over into or through the break. Right. But let's get into it. So Ladna opens things up with a bang, literally, as she just casts Fireball immediately, but making sure not to hit Joe and the other prisoner. And a Paragon's Call member who is seemingly a monk kind of scampers up to the roof and begins attacking Ladna. And there's a bunch of characters in this combat. Like I said, we've got all of Bell's Hells, we've got Dancer, and we've got like several enemies here. There's the roguish one, like I said. There's a monk, there's some casters, there's a dragonborn, and there is a half giant who we find out to be is General Ratanish of the Paragon's Call. Mm-hmm. So combat pops off on 3 different fronts. The big moves that happen immediately are Chetney uses his new sword, Grastachar, to charm one of the casters. FCG casts Banish on Ratanish, sending him away. And Dancer, who is waiting outside for safety, utilizes Pussy the Second to go in and cast spells. So she actually heals Chetney, who has taken some actually pretty big damage thanks to heat metal on his armor. and just additional damage as this combat is going on. The enemy Chetney charmed does end up breaking the charm. But at a later point, Fern actually charms another individual, the Dragonborn, I believe. So combat's continuing. Enemies are starting to drop eventually. Ashton has this awesome double nat 20 moment on the roguish individual, dealing a ton of damage. And meanwhile, Orem, for most of this combat, has kind of been darting around, trying and failing to utilize like different machines that are in Imahara Joe's shop, but they're mostly like broken down crawlers, so he can't do too much with them. But he does ultimately use Seedling to grapple one of the enemies and kind of tie it to one of these broken crawlers, and then attacks the crawler several times to get it to explode, essentially. And then like a crawler adjacent to it, I think, explodes right after and just like obliterates this person. Combat continues. A few people are actually starting to look rough, but FCG casts a mass heal wounds on the party. And that really kind of gives the for sure edge to Bell's Hells at this point. So one of the casters is actually a druid, as we come to find out, and they wild shape into a giant eagle, grab Joe and the bunny prisoner, and just try to fly away. There are a couple strikes made on this eagle as they're making their escape, but not enough. And the eagle does get out and takes to the sky. And on Ashton's next turn, this druid is 60 feet away. So Ashton is able to use their wormhole strike, which has a 60-foot range exactly. And so he's able to attack through a portal, does 42 damage, which is enough to destroy the eagle form. So the druid reverts. And now the druid, the bunny, and Joe are all plummeting down to like a wrought iron fence. And that's actually where we go to break on the first half.
Yeah, so coming back from break, these people are basically falling from the sky, and Ashton does his Violet Gateway to basically lunge through, grab Imahara Joe, and then like position himself to have his back be falling. And then Orem is going to use his, I can't think of the name of his boots, but gives him like the extra jumping ability.
I think it's like boots of striding and springing or something like that.
Yeah. So he's going to jump and use bait and switch to try to swap himself with the Lagomore, the bunny. Meanwhile, Imogen is going to use telekinesis, I think, with his shield, because they're falling towards this like this like spiky fence, for lack of a better phrase. So she's going to use a shield to like press down on the spikes and create kind of like a metal slide, so to speak. And sure enough, they fall, they roll off, and they end up being totally okay. The druid falls and is unconscious, and they're about to finish off the druid, but then they have kind of a meta moment of like, well, wait, hang on a second, let's not kill the druid because we don't want to actually get out of combat, because there still is General Ratanish. And I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, but FCG had actually casted Banish on Ratanish, and so Ratanish isn't even in the fight. He's gone for a minute, which every round's about 6 seconds. So they're kind of like, well, hang on, let's not get out of initiative yet. Let's wait and let's mess up General Ratanish. So they all position themselves. This is like peak D&D, by the way.
Yeah,
they
totally.
all position themselves around where Ratanish was banished, like literally like a circle, like steal his lunch money kind of situation. FCG drops the banish, and then Matt has each of them go through and explain their attack on General Ratanish. And I think we make it all the way to Orem, where Orem gets the how do you want to do this, and basically like slices Ratanish's leg. Ratanish falls down, and then like gives the nod to Ashton, who basically says, you should have killed me when you had the chance, and then like uses the end of his mace to like basically like he like impales and like rips open the rib cage of Ratanish.
Brutal.
He is super dead. It's very graphic, and Orm's like, I kind of wish I hadn't done that. So anyway, so and then Matt also mentions, oh yeah, and by the way, that druid that was falling from the sky also died too. So combat's over. And they're kind of like, wow, okay, we killed Ratanish, we're good. And they're like, well, Joe, how are you? What's been going on? Who's this person you're with? And Joe's basically like, okay, for the last several days, Ratanish and others have been holding us here hostage. holding us captive and basically asking us to build things. One thing, interestingly, is something described as a brimstone nullifier. It does exactly what it sounds like. It causes brimstone to become inactive. Now, we know brimstone is one of the main ingredients, for lack of a better phrase, on the skyships that allow them to fly. And so, for whatever reason, the Paragon's Call, and by extension, Ludinus and the Ruby Vanguard, are for some reason wanting to affect Broomstone in some way. In addition to this, they do meet who the Lagomore is. This is Verna the Viper, who is a tinkerer and the head of the Overmind sect. Which, by the way, I don't know if this is from a previous campaign. I had no idea what it is, but apparently it's like a tinkerer's league or organization. Is that right, or is there more details there?
I don't think we'd ever heard of that before. So
Okay.
y'all correct me if I'm wrong.
So Verna's a tinkerer and especially specializes in explosives, and like I mentioned, is being held hostage with Joe to do all kinds of things. They loot all of the bodies. They find various items. Ratanish has like this awesome axe, and also like this. They all have like a matron of the matron of Ravens like necklace or something to that effect. But Ratanish's has like a special sort of like either insignia or like just flare on it that signifies like this person's like the real deal, or like kind of like a leader, I guess, among the others. All during this, by the way, they're noticing that the explosions that happened of the crawlers during combat is beginning to attract some attention, and they're like, we probably need to get out of here quick. So they're like, where can we go? What can we do? They joke about going to Taste of Taldore, and it's like, well, it's like 5 a.m, so maybe we should do that. And then they remember Hondir's hideout, which, if you don't recall who Hondir was, back when they were in Basaras, a few dozen episodes ago, there was Hondir, who was a member of the Grim Verity, who was basically hiding out since Otahan and presumably the Ruby Vanguard were going around and killing members of the Grim Verity, them or maybe even Vasselheim in some ways. So Hondir had been hiding out in this hideout. They go back to his hideout, and Hondir is no longer there. In fact, it looks like people have been squatting here and left maybe the better part of a day ago. So finally able to take a short rest, they begin to ask questions. Verna's apparently from here. Verna apparently knows Fern's parents and immediately recognizes Fern as like, hey, yeah, you're a Calloway, right? They have a brief conversation on like, should we go see Fern's parents? And she's like, maybe another time. And Joe and Verna begin to finally look at the whole reason they came here, getting the funnel of Ludinus fixed. There's a brief scene of them both like looking at it and kind of marveling over the expertise and craftsmanship of it. And basically where they land is, okay, it is an incredible magical item. It seems like whoever uses it is, as we ascertained, is absorbing the essence of whatever it's taking it from. And to fix it, it's going to take the better part of 2 or 3 weeks to actually correctly fix this thing. And then with a minor ritual, we can attune it from there. And they mentioned that one of the main things they're going to need to fix it is going to be residuum. So they're having some conversation on like, well, where do we go from here? What do we do from here? And someone makes the observation that, well, we know a place that has a lot of residuum, namely Whitestone. And more importantly, there's a person in Whitestone who is a bit of an a-hole, who is an amazing tinkerer. And so they're like, maybe we should see if Timothy Chalamet can, and also I think Laudna Marisha Ray, I think, even called her Vanessa Carlton at one point, but was like, maybe Timothy Chalamet can take them to Whitestone while we go on to the Shattered Teeth. And they basically decide, you know what, that seems like a really good idea. So they're going to hold out here for a little bit. However, Ashton still has some things that he's wanting to do. And so he actually begins to move away, to head over to the All Minds Burn. Imogen basically says, hey, I'd love to go with you. I'd love to accompany you with this as sort of the day's like warming up. So he takes her with him. And they go to the All Minds Burn. And again, if you don't remember this from like a previous episode, this was like the it's not right to call it a commune. I think of like a a place where like a bunch of people, I guess it is like a commune. What's the word I'm thinking of?
Like a
I think of it
cult?
like not even like a cult. Like I think of like a scene from every reference I'm trying to think of. I can't think of the name of it from Mr. Robot, where he's doing like the hackathon and everyone's like down in the dark, like all on their computers.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that in the sense of like everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and yet when Ashton and Imogen walk in, like everyone looks. And there's some kind of sentience across all of them. And again, we got this in a previous episode. Well, as Ashton comes in, he's immediately looking for Justy, who is the leader of the All Mindsburg. And a younger woman basically pops in and is like, "Hey, who are you looking for? What are you doing?" And we come to figure out that this is Shady Sally. Shady Sally is one of a former member of the Nobodies, the group that Ashton used to run with, and is kind of like, hey, what do you need? What are you doing here? It's kind of actually a bit testy. Ashton is like, hey, we don't. Ashton to Imogen later says, you don't leave people. He said this before, so there's a bit of a tension there with Shady Sally, but basically tells Shady Sally like, hey, there's a lot happening. We have to get the Nobodies back together, and basically following Keyleth's advice of we're going to need help. We need to have all hands on deck. We need to get as much help as we can. Justy shows up, and Justy basically tells Ashton, hey, someone's been asking for you. This sentience has been asking for you. And it's around this time that Imogen sort of lets her guard down mentally a little bit and immediately is eagerly pressed on like this mental psionic force in this building. And Imogen describes it as like she's not resisting. And this creature isn't dangerous yet, but is eager, if that makes sense. Justy leads them down, I think like under the floor, like down into like a basement of sorts, where it's no longer like building materials. It's almost like a cave-like cellar is kind of the impression I got, but like sort of like this mold and mold's not the right word. Like moss and like spongy something that's like in the walls and on the floor. And they basically come into this room with like these mucousy tendrils and like this central mucousy pillar, and most freakily skeletons of presumably members of the All Minds Burn who have come who've returned back to the source, I guess. And Justy's being very cryptic, explaining that what they're looking at is something that's been here for hundreds of years, and that it's this, and is being very vague, like this is all of us, like we are it, kind of very cultish stuff, I guess. And Imogen decides to like fully let her guard down. This sentience, this feeling enters her mind, searches through her memory. She has all sorts of memories of being a kid and catching firebugs, and then a memory of her seeing Laudna die, and then like, playing in a creek with her dad, like all sorts of these other different things. And for whatever, we're going to talk about in the discussion, for whatever reason, they're like, yeah, you seem good. Like, we want to help you out.
You're all right.
Yeah, you seem totally fine, surrounded by skeletons. I honestly, like, kind of the impression that they got was like, Predathos is really bad, and this might be something that could be helpful against the fight against Predathos. And it's basically, Imogen's like, so what can we do? What can we do to help? And Matt describes like this size of an orange, like mucousy bulb that comes down that he calls the brood pit. And that this creature basically says in their mind to take it and then plant it somewhere. And Imogen's like, the moon seems like a great place for that. Let's take it with us there. And
I think it specifically wanted to be planted on the moon.
Oh, okay, really? Okay. I thought Imogen just said like, how's the moon? How's Rudis? So that actually makes sense then. Anyway, so after all this happens, they're like, well, this was great. We cut back to Honder's hideout. Laudna, it's only been an hour, but Laudna is freaking out about Imogen being gone, and she believes that Ashton has kidnapped Imogen and has, he's the most suspicious of the group, apparently. Right around that time, Imogen shows back up, and she's like, yeah, it's been an hour. Like, what were you freaking out for? And she's like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway. They meet back up with Keyleth, who had been out, doing her own thing. Keyleth mentions that she did in fact meet with someone helpful. I don't remember the name of the person, but basically has come to find out that forces have been gathering, basically armies have been gathering, like these skyships they see here in Basaras, to take on an army that is around the excavation site that is now known as the Bloody Bridge. Is that right, by the way, or is it a different
I think
locale?
so. I think so.
Okay. I think this was the implication because it's a red beam, so the Bloody Bridge.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a deadlock here, and they know that sooner or later this deadlock is going to break and it's going to shift in one way or the other. They need more friends, they need more allies, and this is basically where their journey together ends. So Imogen asks, hey, can you take our friends to Whitestone? She says, basically, yes, I have to go. There's a lot of people I need to go meet, some people I need to call out of retirement, yada, yada. We'll eventually go to Whitestone. And then she opens a portal for, in this tree, to take them to the Shattered Teeth. And as they're passing through, she basically says, hey, go find Jirana, the Shore Shrew, which sounded like a mispronounced sorceress. But Jirana, the Shore Shrew, who can tell them how to find Yvonne Trevere, the Tree of Atrophy. And then also says something along the lines of like, also either watch out for or like ask about Jirana's friend Torres as well. And also Jirana's, not to butcher it, but is also a turtle, by the way. So turtle creature. So anyway, all that to say, and that is where the episode ends. Episode number 7 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role. And don't forget, if you're watching just the recap, you can see our full thoughts and discussion. Tell us your thoughts and theories on the full episode linked down below.
Pop, pop.